So welcome everyone. Absolutely brilliant to see you for our second round this time round. Our second round of talking about employee advocacy. This time I've played on the song "We're Fixing the Holes Where the Rain Comes In," predominantly because actually last time we talked about creating an advocacy program and what the challenges are, but actually, you know, it all seems so simple, doesn't it, when you put it all down on paper, that employee advocacy seems like a very simple concept, but actually it can be quite difficult. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Katy, Howell from independent social media agency Immediate Future, and I'll be hosting today and asking all your questions as well as some we've prepared, and sharing really the biggest challenges to make sure we get this spot on for you guys. Please can you take a look at the poll which should have popped up and pick your top 3 challenges, the things that you're finding are the biggest problem with employee advocacy programs. So while you're deciding your top 3, let me introduce you to our fabulous panel. 3 people who not only understand the principles and best practice of employee advocacy, but who have also have hands-on experience in executing those programs. So first up, Malin Liden, Vice President and Head of EMEA Marketing Transformation Office at SAP, with the longest job title ever. Hi.
Sorry about that.
Tim Williams, CEO of Onalytica. Hi, Tim.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Sorry, I haven't spoken yet, so I need to clear my throat, but it's a pleasure to be here.
And last but not least, Anita Veszeli, Director of Social Media and Advocacy at Ericsson.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Fabulous. Now, why don't we, while people are still filling in that poll, why don't we, you guys introduce yourselves, you know, and talk maybe about what has been your biggest challenge in employee advocacy. I don't know if you want to kick off, Tim.
Yeah, sure, and happy to. So, I mean, we're a technology vendor focusing on influence marketing and influencer advocacy. So when we talk about employee advocacy, it's helping exec leaders and subject matter experts become more influential. And really what I see, one of the main challenges from brands is how to transform their employee advocacy program from an internal echo chamber to driving external impact with their target audience. So a lot of brands have, I think everyone feels like they've got fantastic employees, loads of expertise, but sometimes they feel like they're just talking internally into their own internal network. So how can you actually sort of transform those wonderful employees and the expertise that they have to content which is driving external impact, and you can actually showcase value within marketing? So that's really one of the main challenges that we've seen over the past few years.
Malin, do you want to run next?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm actually quite a veteran at SAP. I'm not going to say how many years because it makes me feel old then. But I'm also, I love the topic of social media. I'm a bit of a social selling pioneer, I would say. I helped introduce it, led an initiative in 2014 at SAP when social selling was a new and shiny thing. I'm also a community champion because I really love how communities bring people together who want to achieve the same thing. So I guess I believe more in shared purpose over shared reporting lines. I'm also a champion for animal rights on the personal side. I have 3 adopted dogs that I love very much. Anyone who follows me on social will know. And generally, I believe that not only standing still is moving backwards. If you move forward slowly, you're also moving backwards. Compared to your competition, at least. So I like to push the envelope in everything that I do. I love all things new, which is probably why it's timely and good that I am leading the transformation office in EMEA marketing. I get to do a lot of new things. And if I look at employee advocacy, the biggest challenges that I've seen is probably to get people to get started in the first place. There is a lot of fear to overcome for a lot of people. And once you get them over the fear of sharing, then it comes back to what Tim said, making sure that people share meaningful content, not just sharing for the sake of sharing. And then finally, to connect it to results, because that is how you make it sustainable. If people feel the results for themselves and for the organization, then it's sustainable. If it feels like just an activity without impact, then it doesn't go on.
Oh, that's a good point. That is a cracking point. Don't forget to fill the poll in, and we'll turn to Anita.
Hello, my name is Anita Veszeli, and I'm leading social media globally at Ericsson. So my responsibility is really from the governance, social listening, organic social content, paid social governance, influencer marketing, employee advocacy. So it's really, really the full scope of social, because I really believe that social is not just a channel, but most of the brands are still focusing on and publishing content there. It's getting harder and harder to see results. Of course, with paid, you have the different campaigns that can drive leads or brand awareness, but really what is the sweet spot is what we are really talking about here, is that employees. And I think there are several challenges, or maybe it's also how we define employee advocacy, because I think many people really think that it's an advocacy tool where you have branded content, maybe third party or curated content, and people just go in and share, even sometimes not even rewriting the suggested post. But as Tim mentioned, how do you take that to the next level? And I think this is where some of the challenges to overcome that. How do you design maybe sub programs within your overall advocacy? Because your executive leadership team most probably needs a separate strategy and different support. Then social selling, as Malin mentioned, is also in my book, at least, part of employee advocacy, but it has a different set of tools. When you come to employer brand or talent attraction, that needs maybe a slightly different. Some of the basics are there, but how you measure and what they need to really succeed is something different. And then you have your experts and how they can take the space and be part of different discussions. So I think it's one of the challenges is really looking into the different personas internally, what they really need, and within the overall advocacy, really creating some of those small little programs, which sounds again like simple and easy, right? It is not. And I think it's really good to point out that employee advocacy is not really a sprint, it's a marathon, because it really needs change, what Malin already mentioned, that people need time and they need to feel secure to really take those next steps.
Yeah, oh gosh, God, I feel like we've done the whole webinar, answered all the problems. Actually, that's really, while Belle publishes the poll, and if Belle, if you can pop it into our chat, just so I can have a look at the results. I thought it might be interesting. There's already some data out there that says one of the biggest things, which I think in a way we're all kind of touching on, is what are the top three challenges? And the first one is content, which 53% of marketeers say is the biggest challenge, and then difficulty to keep employees motivated, which 49% of marketeers say, and then low adoption rate of the program by employees, which is at 47%. So I'm trying to see what's top of the poll. I don't know if it's come in yet. Let me go to it while we're waiting. We always know that in pole position is the challenge of content, which is, frankly, a challenge beyond employee advocacy. From what you've said, Anita, actually something really interesting. Is there because you talked about, not just publishing what's out there, is there a balance between curated and created content?
I think absolutely. I think probably there are different industries and different brands. So at Ericsson, content has never been a problem for us. I mean, this is just like a content generator company. 100,000 employees, different business units, market areas. There's always a report. There's always a product launch, an event, whether it's virtual or something. So content, branded content, was never ever a challenge. But then when we started to look into that, what marketing professionals should or want to discuss out there, or some of our data scientists, each of them needs different sets of content pieces. Our sales teams need something different than some of the network engineers or the people who work in R&D. And then how do you source that? And I think the sourcing part, again, coming into an employee advocacy tool is quite easy, but then you also need to double check. that is that just like fact checking, that whatever you share and you put into your employee advocacy program, you really need to have a responsibility. You cannot really make mistakes. And just curating that content is a massive job. So currently we have, I think, 3 or 4 people who are doing it for Ericsson.
Wow.
Yeah.
And is it the same for you, Malin?
Well, I think the dilemma that we have with employee advocacy is to really strike that balance between how much do you give to people to make it easy, because I saw also that Bell was posting in some of the poll results that to get people to start sharing and to continue to share, you have to make it easy, right? But if you make it too easy and if you give too much, then we become lazy and also uninteresting, because if we only share the pre-approved type of content, then you're not interesting. You're not sharing content that resonates. And if you don't share content that resonates, then it's also not sustainable, because then it's also no fun. If no one engages with your content, if you don't get any results from your social activity as an employee, then why should you continue? It's not fun to do something for the sake of doing it.
But it's, yeah, very, very true. And actually, it's also about expanding your network, isn't it? It's about that trigger of motivation of self.
Yeah.
Determination.
That is huge. And this is also what I've seen as one of the biggest benefits for people, and also a way to convince people to invest in employee advocacy is the network that you build, and also the way that you learn. It becomes a way to learn together with people. It's peer-to-peer learning, essentially, and you're doing advocacy at the same time. So the way that you can tap into networks, the way you can position yourself, build thought leadership, open up career opportunities, there are a lot of really positive side effects, but it's sometimes hard to explain before you feel it. If you felt the benefit, then you never have to be convinced again. Then you want to do it again and again and again.
Yeah, no, I think that just if I could add a few comments here, if you're a really large brand, you're trying to motivate employees, you've got to think about the easiest way for this to actually bring results to you, and it is what Malin and Anita have been saying. It's if the motivation comes from the employees and they feel it, and they don't need to be sort of retrained or remotivated, because it's part of the cultural fabric of what you do. So if you've got 20 execs or subject matter experts, you can do that by creating budget or time or resource for creating employee generated content and make it about them, make them the hero of the content. But if you've got 100,000 employees, you suddenly run into this massive social transformation and cultural evolution, which is what Anita was talking about, which is the marathon, which will change over time, but will also help if senior leaders are really advocating for this kind of change in content creation. So it is about employee generated content, and it depends when you're the sort of lead of your program how many people you can influence. You've got wonderful remits like Anita and Malin's where they can touch a lot of people. You've got other people that are in charge of maybe 20 to 50 people, where they've got different kind of challenges, but they can almost speak to all of their employees at once. So I think it's all about the motivation of the employees, and it's no surprise to see that that's at the top of the poll. Actually,
Tim, that brings me on to the next bit, which is, there is a conversation at the moment around whether or not an employee personal brand matters. And given your experience and understanding of influence, do you think that all employees or some employees require or should have a kind of personal brand of their own?
I think the employees that want a personal brand should be facilitated and enabled by the social media and the marketing teams. And I think that's where there just needs to be more investment in social media and marketing just generally for this kind of purpose. So I would advocate content creation budgets going more towards social media enablement of employee generated content. But I don't think if you don't want a personal brand, I don't think a brand would force you to try and create one. But I do think that the people that have the expertise that want the personal brand but are not sure how to communicate it, I think there's the opportunity to develop the personal brand. And I think you can become influential on social media by certain tactics which involve external influences, and that's where the kind of magic is, I think, for the subject matter experts.
I've got a little question here from Michael, who says, wanting a little clarification on our curation conversation. Why would you further curate or repurpose content which has already been published by other employees, or the company? Why would you?
When I say curated content, I would refer to third-party content that is not necessarily a branded content. It's not a branded white paper or an event. It's a third-party research maybe, or it's an article that can resonate to the different industries with different viewpoints that could also be helpful or useful for employees, either just to consume, even if they are not sharing it, but if they would like to share it with their personal network on social, then for me, that's the curated content.
Yeah, and I think maybe to add to that too, it's also about efficiency. Yeah? Nobody has time, and really that's our most precious resource. And for me, the curation is also about putting your own spin to it. And I often say, when people ask me, how do you have time to spend so much time on social media? They think I don't work. And my answer to that is, I read for myself. And I read to educate myself, to inform myself, and I read with the glasses of my network on. So I imagine the glasses of my network, and I read it thinking, what could my network be interested in? It's probably different from what someone else has been maybe sharing the same piece, but picking out something else. I pick out what I think is interesting for my followers, for my network. And then I am doing a service to them, and it doesn't cost me any extra time because I'm anyway reading the piece, but I'm picking out what I think will be particularly interesting for them. So most of the time they might not read the whole piece of content that someone else might already have shared, but I'm bringing them a service, pointing out what I think might be interesting for them. And if they want, they can explore more. So for me, it's also a service that you give to your network. It's an investment into your network. And at the same time, you get more value out of the pieces of content that exist out there.
Actually, let's look at the poll results, because although content was the biggest in the research that's been done before, content for our people watching us today is 25%. And actually, the biggest challenge is in motivating employees. And I'm really not surprised, because that really is what I'm hearing. And in fact, there's some quite interesting data. 30% of employees who choose not to share information about their company on social media said they don't use social media for business reasons at all, which is really surprising. And 15% said they don't want to overwhelm their network with posts about their company. And another 15% just didn't want to sound like a, dare I say it, company robot. So how do you tackle this challenge? Tim, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I think it's about what type of content people want to share. I mean, we have the same challenges. So at Onalytica, we got 40 employees, and sometimes you look at the results and you think, actually, why wouldn't they share more? But we've done some fantastic research about a certain area, but still they're not sharing it. And it's not about them. It's not something that they have necessarily a personal opinion. Yeah, they're proud that we've done it, but not proud enough to post on their network. So I think it's about education if they see the impact. But if they're not in a commercial role, then why would they do that? So I think it's all about how can you make it about the employees, and you're not going to get everyone to post content. So I think what you can do as a team is you can either have a culture where if you produce some research, for example, you can encourage people to put their own spin on it on social, or try and facilitate people to do that. You could even create social asset or content assets on social for some of your exec leaders or subject matter experts with their own quote on their own take. As Malin was saying, when you've read through something, this is what I find particularly interesting to my network. If you invest in that facilitation, you'll get many more motivated employees, because it's about them, not the company.
Yeah. And I think we also have to look ourselves in the mirror, at least in the corporate environment, that some of the content that we produce is boring. And if it's boring, then people are not going to share it. I'm sorry.
That's so true.
We promise to be brutally honest about the challenges. And so how do we motivate people to share? What I see actually work really well at SAP is purpose-related content. We have a lot of content around sustainability, around investing, supporting minorities, And here, if you have a wide range of these type of topics, then everyone can find something that is personal to them. And if it's personal to them, they are more inclined to share it. And I think this is also good to think about in a step-by-step strategy. If you have this type of content, it's a good entry point for people. They get started and they say, oh, it's not so bad to share content. I actually enjoy it. And then maybe they will also share a little bit more, I don't know, commercially related content that you also have. But if you start with purpose-related content or stories, people like to share stories. But if you go out with a white paper to say, oh, this solution is the best thing since sliced bread, no wonder people don't want to share it with the networks, because actually it's a good thing. What we always say when we teach employee advocacy is to serve your network. You should share things that you think they will be interested in, because otherwise you're abusing your network. And then on the other hand, we feed them content that is boring. It doesn't fit together.
Absolutely, 100% agree, Malin. And I think it's also about the culture or flexible working. So companies are producing a lot of marketing material. And as you said, most of them are not relevant or boring. You can either create snackable pieces that could be relevant out of that, but that also takes time that you read through and what are the top 5 tips that could be relevant for the network. But I think companies are so much more than that. How they are approaching the future of work, the hybrid events. You remember when everyone was posting like, this is how I work from home. And now that went a little bit boring because that was unique and people really wanted to share it. But I think now, as we just discussed before we started this webinar, you are working from Sweden right now. So your company allows you to be flexible and work from anywhere. I can also work from a different country. And I think some of these are, even though that they are not necessarily sharing branded content, they are still support advocacy. They are human. They are something important for the person, but it also shows to the future talent or others that this company stands out and it has a purpose and really takes care of its employees. So I think there are different levels to it. And when you come to this one, content creation or sharing is actually quite simple.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we need content that speaks to both the hearts and the minds. If you have both the heart and the mind, then people are going to share.
Actually, that kind of brings me on to a question Darren has just posed, which I think is quite interesting. He feels that we've not covered something on the checklist, which is internal resource that's available, which often ends up being, one-to-one consultant for employee social advocacy and helping them with their questions. And that person is often doing the corporate site and everything else. We've already heard from Anita that she has lots of support, certainly in curation. Malin, how does it work? How do you resource for this?
We've had really good experience at SAP with peer-to-peer training. So we invested a lot in train the trainer programs internally, because we find that also the peers are very credible to the colleagues. If I see a colleague who is doing something really well, that they are building their brand, it's resonating, they are getting attention, you can see that it's a positive thing for them and their careers, then they want to do the same. And so we invest quite a lot in finding the early adopters, the ones that have the fire in them, who want to do it, that are charismatic about it and who want to share with other people, and we educate them to train their colleagues. And that for us has been a breakthrough, I would say, way to get these type of concepts go broad, because also we are a very big company. So if we were to hire consultants to help our employees, it would be very expensive. And actually, we believe that we have it in us. I'm sure in every organization there is a share of people who naturally do this well. Who have the social spirit in them, they naturally know how to do it and understand what it takes. And if you find them, if you identify them, you invest in them, you also put the spotlight on them, you recognize them, you make them to role models for others, but you also rely on them to pass it on to others to pay it forward. That to me has been a really great way to both influence the culture and train the hard skills.
So do you guys think that kind of back in the day, it was very popular, the kind of gamification leaderboard and such, like, do they actually work? Do they help motivate staff?
Oh, I'm careful about them, to be honest, because I think you can, as with anything, you can do it well and you can do it not well. Sadly, I've seen some of those initiatives not work so well because it tends to encourage the spamming, the people who just share a lot, the corporate content, the plain content, just being, what did you say, a robot, a social media robot, a corporate robot. Those are the ones that tend to score high because, of course, you can push out a lot of volume if you don't put in too much thought in it. But if you share meaningful content, if you read with the glasses of your audience, if you tailor the message, you're not going to share as much. And sometimes these leaderboards don't really recognize the difference.
I think part of, just to build on those points, what we find really helpful is to try and sort of separate, employee advocacy into certain sort of segments. So you've got all of your staff, like the wider employees, and then you've got sales, you've got subject matter experts, and then you've got exec leaders. And I think, as Anita was saying, just at the beginning, or I forget whether it was just before we came on, employee advocacy is exec comms, it's subject matter expert advocacy, it's social selling, it's content marketing, it's digital marketing, it's events, it's called so many different things that almost, when we talk about how to fix employee advocacy, you can't fix all of these different programs in one conversation. We've only got 45 minutes to 1 hour. So I think it's really important when you talk about leaderboards to start segmenting it into different applications, and then you can provide when you talk about leaderboards, you can measure how well the employees are developing their personal brand for people that are motivated to be able to do that. Because if you provide the right measurements, then they're going to be really motivated in the program. So it does work, but it doesn't work if you do a leaderboard for the whole company, and especially if you're measuring just impressions, because it turns into vanity metrics and spamming machines, and those have been the problems over like many years. So I just thought that would be helpful to try and segment it so that we don't try and fix too much.
Anita, how do you communicate the benefits to employees? How do you help them sit without sounding like a cheerleader?
I also try to use the same expression that you did, that we don't want them to become Ericsson robots, because it doesn't build trust, it doesn't build relationships, and still so many employees or leaders think, because this is what they see from other companies, that is what advocacy is. And I have to take sometimes those conversations that, well, having your billboard as it's your personal profile. It's not an Ericsson branded channel. You are not a channel. You are a human being, and your own personal social space is also yours. So if you share anything that is related to the company, then we are thankful for that. But you really need to think about yourself and your network and what you get out of it. So we always start to, whenever it also depends, because obviously I cannot have conversations with 100,000 employees. So, but whenever we have those specific programs, for example, the executives or sales teams, we look into that, what motivates them. Is it learning? What is their challenge? Because everyday learning should really be built in. And that's also the growth mindset. It's important for each individual and also for the company as well. How can they use social for learning? Either content creation, this is where, like Tim mentions, to pair them up with external experts or influencers. That is content creation. They don't all they need is kind of like right now, what we do is bringing in your expertise and sharing it. And 4 of us created content that most probably is useful for some of our audiences, because we work with advocacy. Then for some of them is how to make customer connections easier. That's when it comes in, that how many connections or how can you foster relationships with your customers on one-to-one video calls or face-to-face. Social media provides you a lot better chance to actually cultivate those relationships and build stronger ones. So I would usually start, what is their personal objectives, either as a business or as a person? What is it really in it for them? And then we start the conversation from there, because I think that is something where we should start. And that's when it's also the motivation, it comes a lot more natural than whenever we say, oh, here's a press release, go ahead and share it. We want another deal. Oh, here's another deal. Here's a new report. Oh, sign up for this event. I mean, it just doesn't really add value. And I think this is what Malin said earlier, that when you don't see the results, or you have 3 likes or even 50 or 60, but from your own colleagues, that's not really something that is purposeful. But when you start to have those conversations, and I can also see some names who joined, that we are having those discussions, and I learn a lot from them, and hopefully they also get something out of my thoughts. But this is when, as Malin said, you don't need the motivation, because actually it brings value to me. I learn, I met amazing people who I cannot really wait to meet them in person, not just on social or online, but it's really comes back to that motivation for each individual.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I also always start the exercises with finding your own purpose. And I think this should be the starting point for any employee advocacy activity, is to help people match employee advocacy with their own goals. Help them find a reason that matters to them. Because if we say, oh, please share this press release, or please do advocacy for the sake of advocacy, it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to them. It's not a reason that matters to them. But if you help them, I usually start with a conversation around your personal brand. What do you want to be known for? I ask people to Google themselves, see what comes up. Does anything come up? Is it what you want? Is it not what you want? And if you could have a wish, what would you like to come up? What do you want to be known for? What do you want to be famous for in your network? And then you start to see, how can employee advocacy, social media, social selling, you name it, whatever it is, how can that contribute to you being known for what you want to be known for?
Oh, that is fantastic, because it's more in the day we're in at the moment, and certainly here for those of you joining us from the UK, where we have the Great Resignation going on as people are leaving their jobs. It feels like that is so much more than just employee advocacy. It's all about culture, isn't it? It's that very amazing change, which is giving people real purpose for why they're doing what they do every day, 40 hours a week, you know.
I think sometimes, just building on what Malin was saying, when you're doing looking at your personal brand, and I speak to people that say, I don't know what to say, or I'm not confident about what I should be saying, and stuff like that. If you take a few topics which you feel you've got expertise on, and then if you look at the sector which you probably want to build your career in, and hopefully the current company and some services that they offer, plus your personal interests, if you almost do a little Venn diagram of those 3, you should be able to find some angles where you could be one of the best voices globally in those niches, because no one's got those personal interests plus that expertise plus that sector knowledge, and you can be your own person just with a little exercise like that. You can do that. And I imagine speaking to Ericsson and SAP, the opportunity for being able to help people develop their personal brand at scale is like an amazing opportunity, but a massive challenge, because 100,000 people is a lot of people to be able to to evolve. But just when you're speaking one-to-one or one-to-few, then that's quite a good exercise, I found.
And it's interesting because what's coming across is there is investment, or as Darren pointed out, this need for coaching or consultative behavior, but there's quite a lot of investment. And with that investment is the need for leadership. I think we've lost Malin, have we? She's coming back. Great. But it's interesting that 30% of leaders have, or the audience has said that we have a leadership buy-in issue. And I wondered whether or not, part of that investment is about leadership buy-in. I don't know who wants to talk about how we get leadership buy-in, so that because they will let us spend the time on this.
Yeah, I think it's super important, and I've seen it at SAP. In fact, we had, when I started my social selling program, when it was a new and shiny thing, we had a very senior sales executive. It's not at SAP anymore, so I think it's okay to talk about. And he was telling people, because we asked him to, his people, they need to do social selling, but he refused to put to create a LinkedIn page for himself. He didn't have a LinkedIn profile, and here comes the reason: because he was afraid that then he would be sold to. That was a difficult situation for the social selling sort of effort. And then on the other hand, I had the fortune to work for a gentleman called Jonathan Becker. He was the CMO at SAP a few years ago, and he was widely known at SAP as the social CMO. He was one of the first top executives who wrote his tweets himself, but he was very particular about really managing his own brand himself. And he really showed the entire organization that it's cool to be on social. And it was fascinating to see how the people who were on social were much closer to him because they were interacting with him across a lot of hierarchy levels. They would normally not have access to him, but because they read his blog, they commented on his blog, they had conversations, they were much closer, and he knew them more than he might have known other people who were not on social. So he showed people in quite a cool way, why it makes sense and why it's beneficial to engage in social media activities. So I think leadership, the role modeling is super important, and you need people who are authentic about what they are asking. If you're asking your team to do social media, but you don't want to do it yourself, then they're not going to believe it.
Absolutely. And I think it probably differs how to get buy-in to different companies. So if you look at the main business objectives, whether it's generating sales, maybe you start your advocacy program with social selling. If it's really about being part of certain discussions around topics where you want to be seen as a top share of voice as a brand, then you might want to start to focus on your experts and really pairing them up with external experts and influencers to start those conversations. If it's really just about brand awareness and maybe showing some of the KPIs or results that through employees, we get more links to our .com pages, or how do they relate to paid social, then maybe that is something that you start with. So I think it's really important to see that where your business is today, where do you have the easiest buy-in to get started, and when you could get started with either social selling or with executives or with employee advocacy, you should see the results, you show it internally, and then you tell them that imagine the possibilities if we scale this up, or if we involve other parts of the department. I think right now, as you mentioned, Katy, the Great Resignation is there, and it's not just in the UK, it happens everywhere. So attracting talent is a top priority for most of the brands. And then maybe that's where you would like to start. That, okay, how do we work with employer brand or talent attraction teams to really work in advocacy to humanize the brand, and how we can do that? So I think there are different techniques, but it's really about where do you have the easiest buy-in, and start there.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. When you're talking to senior leaders, they've got business outcomes they want to fix, and employee advocates, can be part of the solution. So I think it's really just our responsibility to ask the leaders what they're focused on, what they want to fix, and then connect up the employee advocacy program to that particular outcome, and then ask for their commitment, in terms of their leadership and for them showing up. And when I've worked with really senior exec leaders that don't have the time, but they have their expertise, we get them involved to do video interviews with external influencers, and for them to post it on their channel, so they're seen as people who are participating in this, even though they're not going to be commenting on 50 people's social channels per week, because they're not really in that kind of social vein, but they are showing up, they are committed to it, and you're committing the business outcome results that they want, and then you get really big senior leadership buy-in.
I think we will turn our attention to metrics and measurement in a second, but we have a question in from Anna, which I think is super interesting, actually, because it's very easy to forget that most of us and many of us work for global companies. And she wants to know, what about social selling for companies based in Lithuania? I don't know, I'm not sure why Lithuania and Germany have been picked out, but maybe there's a challenge there. What I have experienced is that they are not too interested in creating their own personal brand or engaging on social media. Do you find, all three of you work in a global capacity, does it change by country? Is there kind of a national culture that sits behind some of this?
A few years ago, I would have said yes, but I'm not so sure anymore. I think there was a time when I started out in Germany where it felt like, people didn't naturally use, a lot of people in Germany don't use Twitter, for example, but on LinkedIn, where are a lot of people who are active. And today my answer is, I think it has more to do with the corporate culture than the geographic culture. It's more how you, again, role model. We have one of our most active executives on social media is German. It's our German HR manager. He's super active, is sharing a lot of content. And then people see, right? Oh, it's safe. They're also pushing the envelope a bit. They're being interesting. They are not being too just polished and flat. They are doing interesting things. So it's the role modeling and also the safe space that you give people, the encouragement, but also, as we discussed earlier, the type of content that you give to people that is attractive for them to share. Those things, to me, I don't know anything about Lithuania, but at least if I think of Germany, and I work a lot with the US and Germany, very different geographic cultures. But in terms of social media behavior, I see a lot of Germans very active at SAP, participating in the social activities that we have.
I think it's both the company culture, and I think company culture also sometimes differs by geography, even though that on a global level you have something that you aim for. The localities also come into play. There are, just like in diversity, for example, there are certain countries where there are topics that are taboo, and even though that the brand stands for them on a global level, we know that in the Middle East, for example, you shouldn't talk about those topics because it's taboo. And I think there are still some maybe Central European, for example, cultures that putting yourself out there is perceived as a self-promotion. It's not necessarily discussing or having like really opinionated views, which doesn't necessarily. It could be good. It can also be perceived as too opinionated or not necessarily nice or open for discussions. And I think sometimes we still have that role, how to overcome them, that it is not for the future, but it's still kind of like that. Not, I think it's the fixed mindset that this is what people are going to think about me. This is what are the things that I shouldn't do, instead of that growth mindset, that how do I want to grow as a person, as a mindset? How can I get, sometimes I have questions that, or think about that, okay, how do I keep my work and life balance? And those are the topics that I would also ask others, that what are your top tips? So these are the things when it's not personal promotion, but it's really something that is on my mind, and I'm looking for other input from others. And I think maybe those could be tips to overcome.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with everything that's been said. I see a lot of similarities between US and Western Europe, and I think that Eastern Europe and Asia are different. And I think that the differences, apart from cultural, I think if you just look at your target audience and the social channels that influence those audiences, then you can work out like what's going to be most effective. And I think it's really just finding out where the target audience that you want to influence is, and which channels and the culture on those social channels as well. I think that's a big thing about it. And then just keeping the content industry focused rather than self-promotion, I think is good. So to be able to work that out on a global level is a challenge, but it's a really fun challenge. And working with the country leaders, I think, is really, really important to achieve.
So we have to turn our attention. We've got a lot of questions, but one in particular that keeps being asked, which is measurement. And I think that's super interesting because it was on our list. I just left it down to the end. So, I think what metrics matter, what matters to the C-suite. Darren has asked, what should your main KPI be? Michael has said, which employee engagement rate should you aim at in an EA program? And previous to this, Asmin had also asked, have you arrived at a way to accurately measure the success of your employee advocacy beyond the stats LinkedIn provides? So we've got LinkedIn engagement rates, and what KPIs do you what should you set? So I don't know who wants to kick off, because there's some hardcore maths in this.
could speak from the experience of SAP, and then probably Anita and the team, they have a more scientific view on how to do this. But for us, in this particular case, our senior executives were interested in impact on sales. It was very simple. That's what they wanted to see. And that's also where we started. And I think it makes sense when you start with metrics to really figure out, it comes back to what Anita also said. Why are you doing employee advocacy? Do you want to impact sales? Do you want to create an employer brand? Do you want to attract talent? Do you want to support your overall brand? What is it? Why are you doing it? Otherwise, you don't know what makes sense to measure. For us, it was sales. And we were fortunate because we were quite early able to tie the social selling activities to our CRM system. So we could actually see how much of the opportunities and leads and ultimately then the revenue was impacted by social selling. And it was a huge number. And then it was quite easy to then go to the executives and say, this might not be as easy to tie to in the CRM system, but just imagine, you can see this huge impact here on the sellers. If we release all of our employees with the credibility that they carry, the networks that they have, it's like the opportunity is endless. And they understood because we gave them the first step was so obvious. We also compared high social selling index to people's success in their jobs, especially in sales. And we saw a correlation. People with high social selling indexes had higher KPI achievements in their sales roles. And it was very consistent. And that really helped us build a case that got people's attention. And then we could ask them to take a leap of faith with employee advocacy, because it was not hard to imagine how the same would translate.
That's just fantastic. I love it. I love it. Is it the same for you, Anita?
I love that, Malin. And I think whenever it comes to measuring social selling, or the program that you have built is one of the most advanced ones. As usual, you are too humble. So that's just really, really amazing and impressive. I would also say and agree, just Malin said, that first start with what is your main objective, and really tie the KPIs into that. I usually like to say that for all employees and through the employee advocacy tool, there are different sets of KPIs. We also had some that we started with, and then as the program matured, or some of our business objectives, we tailored them. So right now, we are still measuring the traffic that we are driving to different Ericsson.com pages and how that relates to it. We are measuring that what content actually employees are sharing. What is the most impactful, because then we can also feed it in to the company that, look, this content doesn't really resonate, or maybe it's just for a specific audience. Then whenever it comes to executives or experts, I just love some of those charts that we work with Onalytica, and that my counterpart really provides to us, that okay, we would like to see that how our employees or executives are connected to the discussions around 5G or sustainability. And then those are the real powerful maps that I can show to executives that, look, we want to be part of these discussions, and currently we are not. So how can we fix that? That we need to work with these experts, we need to work with the influencer community, and over 3 months, I can come back and show that, look, just in 3 months, this is what we achieved. And we are starting to be like part of those conversations, not only our competitors. When it comes to sales or talent attraction, then I think talent attraction and sales quite similar, because you also have a funnel. They are called differently, but the logic behind it is quite similar. And then you really work with those KPIs. And then whenever it's like a super mature program, I think you need to connect all those dots. That is something that we haven't done yet, but that is on my plan, that how can we connect each of these programs and their KPIs to the overall impact that we are creating, and tie it back to business results.
Wow, there's just so much here, isn't there? Yeah, thank you, Anita, for explaining a bit about how we help you. I'm a massive measurement geek, and so it's hard to know where to start. I think that there's probably over 50 metrics that we help analyze, and And one of the challenges is just connecting up the metrics to the outcome that you're trying to focus on. Clearly, Malin, you've done a fantastic job in these people with higher social selling indexes and pipelines, and it's obviously driving a really good revenue for SAP. Once you connect those, then it's a really strong argument which senior leadership buy into. I know Adobe that have a wonderful program as well. I mean, SAP, Ericsson are amazing examples of this. Adobe doesn't do much measurement of their employee advocacy because it's just inbuilt into their culture and it's intrinsic value. And all they do is they focus on trying to make it a wonderful employee experience and personal branding mission, and they don't measure the program. I suppose it's like treating people well, maybe, just in terms of the internal fabric. And they can see the benefit coming up in so many different areas, but they're just not measuring it because they're not too interested in measuring it around the brand objectives. It's all around employee. So I thought that was quite interesting to not necessarily try to measure everything. But when you are trying to measure, whether you're being part of a conversation or whether you're driving sales or whether people are developing their personal brand, there's a ton of metrics. And the one metric which we think is the most important is engagement, because we're talking about social media, and social media is about engaging. It's about being social. And target audience engagement is probably the one KPI that I would focus people on. If you've got the content community that the commerce will follow, if you have that sort of 3 C's mentality.
So we have 8 minutes left. So I want to answer some of these questions that have come through. We have one, so we're going to jump around a little bit now from the topic areas. But David has asked a question, which is, should we focus our EA efforts on those that get it, whatever level of seniority, or focus on executive leaders who aren't comfortable on social, but who would have great influence on the rest of the teams, or both?
I would start with the ones who get it, but not limited to that. But it's such an uphill battle otherwise. If you start with the ones that get it, you create the role models, you create the shining lights, you create the ones that are going to show the other ones what it looks like. And then I would do a tiered strategy and start with a low-hanging fruit.
I would do the same.
Tim?
I would say, absolutely. Start with the people that get it. With the exec leaders, they feel comfortable doing a few things, but not the other things. So if they feel really comfortable speaking to someone, face to face, then create that environment and make them feel part of it, but don't make them do something that they don't want to do. So I think like maybe a small step with them, and then the bigger steps with the people that get it, because you need your exec leaders to be part of the. It's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and actually that's a very good point, because one of the things we've talked about in the past, Tim, is finding the right influencer that can have a conversation with your senior leadership team, and that often creates incredible thought leadership content, and is often a nicer way sometimes for some senior leaders to be involved in EA without actually tweeting every day.
Well, it could be just sharing their experience for 30 minutes, and then someone else writes the article or writes some of the copy for them, and then you give them a bit of assistance with how to push it out on social. So I think one of those two tends to be the kind of main starting point for exec leaders.
Generally, I would say never force anyone. It's never a good idea to force anyone. If you can't manage to motivate them, then focus on the ones that you can motivate. But if you push people to do things, it's never a good idea.
Exactly.
Leading on from that, Michael says, how do you avoid creating an exclusive EA program only, for the social media savvy employees and not for the average Joe? I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it will end up being exclusive, would it not? Because the people that make the effort are in it.
Well, I think you can also do a lot with stories here. I actually use my story. I was not a digital native. I did not grow up with a mobile phone in my hand. I'm very open about it. When I started to do the social selling program at SAP, it was very embarrassing. I had 30 Twitter followers. So hopefully nobody is looking at my Twitter. Now I have some more, but not a huge amount. So if you share stories about the non-usual suspects who have actually made it to something with their influence or with their thought leadership, with their brand building, then people believe that they can do the same. So I think you just have to show them examples.
So we're running out of time. So I want to ask one last question of all of you, which is, what is the most joyous part of an EA program?
I think sometimes, like, I remember when I started like 9 years ago, and people were coming back to me with like, they're really grateful that the company or I was leading the advocacy that time, that I'm actually putting time in it and taking them on this journey, that they are learning, they are getting new skills, that and I think this is something that right now I'm not getting, but the Gustav, who is leading our advocacy program, which is a really, really nice. And I think also to see the impact, what it creates for employees, how it makes them feel that the company really invests a lot in their skill set, and also to see the results whenever you I just love to see those maps, what I already mentioned, that how it's growing and moving, and it really gives it that, yes, what we have done really created a big impact.
Yeah, I think for me it's two things. The first one is when you see those unusual suspects who didn't think this was for them, and you see brands emerge, personal brands emerge. You see how they find their voice on social, how they create influence. That to me is what motivates me. But also when I go on LinkedIn and I see how diverse SAP is represented, because we have so many people out there. Some of them have very colorful opinions. Some of them have really interesting opinions. You have the stories, and you can see how colorful we are represented as a company, and how much more interesting we are as a company because of all these voices that tell the story in a different way.
Amazing. I love the employee engagement and the inclusivity of it all, and then just hearing the stories of anybody coming to say, oh, I got invited to that event to speak on this. You know, this really made my day. I would never have dreamed of doing something like that. Or someone connected with me and we had a really great meeting. It was because of this particular piece of content that I shared, or just a few things that you hear that make everyone's days, and you know, it just brings all the sort of human element to it and the sort of social element. So it's not necessarily the kind of big brand results of moving share of voice by 2% or something like that. It's obviously hearing the personalized stories, which is amazing.
I love that. It's just about, it's a people thing, isn't it? Everybody is just saying it's just a people thing. It's the seeing people blossom around you, find their voices, find their feet, enjoy being part of the business. And I think that's fundamentally, forget all the KPIs and everything else. At the core of this is it's part of that, of the future of work. From my perspective. Listen, thank you, all three of you. Thank you, Anita. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Malin. You have been utterly wonderful, unbelievably wonderful. The comments are flying away. I haven't been able to ask every single question, so we have asked people to pop over onto LinkedIn, and we'll do a little round robin to the panelists so that they can add their responses. So we'll try and make sure that we answer everything that you came to us to listen to. Thank you for listening in for a whole hour. And I look forward to we're going to have to do another one, aren't we? At some time in 2022. This has gone down so well. I've had such a great response. Thank you. And yeah, have a great Thursday.
Thank you, Katy.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.